So the menstruation cycle always is controlled by the master gland, which is called as a hypothalamus. So example, if this is the hypothalamus, and in the hypothalamus there are some neurons which secrete. This is the anterior pituitary, this is the posterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary through the hypothalamus, here at this junction, the hypothalamus will be secreting GnRH. So GnRH means gonadotropin releasing hormone, and these hormones are the one which helps in secretion of the anterior pituitary hormones, namely FSH and LH. So this is very important. So basically hypothalamus is the main organ or the main gland which is doing all the menstruation cycle controlling processes. So now let us understand how many phases we have in a typical menstruation cycle. Yes, before that I would just like to highlight, maybe in the corner, that there are totally 4 hormones which control the menstruation cycle. So the 4 hormones are, 2 are pituitary hormones and 2 are, you can say that, ovarian hormones. The pituitary hormones are FSH, just now I wrote it, and LH. Whereas ovarian hormones are estrogen and progesterone. So there are 2 hormones, estrogen, progesterone, which are ovarian, means ovaries, follicles will be secreting those things. Whereas the pituitary hormone, again there are 2 types, FSH and LH, which are secreted by anterior pituitary lobe. Now let's straight away go into like how exactly the menstruation cycle occurs. So the menstruation cycle is divided, so I will draw like this. The menstruation cycle is divided into 4 phases. For example, here. So what I will do is I will divide the entire cycle, into phases. So let us say, for example, I'll leave some gap here. It is phase 1, that is, okay, first I will write it. This is the biggest one, this is the smallest one, and this is the, so menstruation phase or menstrual phase. This is the phase number 1. The second one is follicular phase, or it is also called as your proliferative phase. Means uterus lining will be more getting deeper and reestablish, regenerate its the inner wall, endometrium. Phase number 3, this is the second phase. Phase number 3 is ovulatory phase, where actually the ovulation occurs. Ovulation phase, that is the phase number 3. Many books have clubbed follicular as well as ovulation together, but we have to make it distinct for understanding. It is very important. And last one is the luteal phase, or it is also called as the secretory phase. And this is the phase number 4. After which the cycle again begins. Now here I will write it as number of days. So if I have to use here, so it is the day 0/1. It is 5th day. I will circle it. And this is the 14th day where actually ovulation occurs. And this is 14 to 28 days. So this is the phase 1, menstrual phase, follicular phase, phase 2, phase 3, ovulatory phase, phase 4, luteal phase, or it is also called secretory phase. talking about this axis. This is this axis. Now we will go for this axis. Now this axis again I will divide into 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now this one is called as, so this I will write it as changes during menstruation. So what are the changes seen? The first change which we have to say is in the uterus or the endometrium. Second is the ovarian hormones. So we know that there are two types of hormones. One is estrogen, one is progesterone. So I'll write here E and P. Third one is what happens to the, what do you say that, ovaries. What happens inside the ovaries? Ovarian changes. Last but not the least, the pituitary hormone change. How the pituitary hormones changes. Okay. So this is how it is very important for us to, differentiate the different aspects of menstruation. So the first one is the so let us study that. First, what happens is in the uterus. In the uterus endometrium, very commonly I told you, during the menstrual phase, the endometrium lining will be decreasing because there will be lot of blood shedding happening. So the thickness of the endometrium will be very, very thin because lot of tissue has worn out. It has been totally scrapped off. At the same time, we should always know that the uterus thickness is controlled by one very important ovarian hormone which is called as a progesterone. So when the uterus endometrium is becoming thin and getting scrapped off and shedding, obviously there is the uterus becomes thin. So when the thinness is there, so the level of progesterone will also be very, very low. So the hormone which is progesterone, I will draw with a blue pen, it is like this. Right? Next one is what happens in the ovaries. We should always remember that during the menstrual cycle, irrespective of shedding or not shedding, regeneration or degeneration of endometrium, the follicles will keep on doing oogenesis. There is no stoppage. So we know that during the time of puberty, the ovaries will be having the primary follicles. So here I will draw that lot of clusters of primary follicles are there, out of which the one becomes enlarged and gets converted into the primary follicle. So this is the primary oocyte or the primary follicle. I will just write the abbreviation as PF for our understanding. Now this PF, what will happen? It has to be converted into it enters into the follicular phase. When it enters into the follicular phase, it has to become the secondary follicle. This is the zona pellucida, around which we have granulosa surrounded by theca layer. So this is a secondary follicle. So what happens initially? Let me tell you. So let's again come back. What happens now? In the follicular phase, which is a proliferation, what happens is the uterus lining will not leave the hope thinking that there is no fertilization in the future, because this preparation process is a continuous process. Always the uterus, after shedding, it continues to regenerate. Even if it completes 5th day, 6th day onwards it start regeneration. So it means what? The thickness of the uterus lining will go on maintained. It will be just going on being maintained. So I will draw here. Again the uterus lining has been, little becoming thicker and thicker and thicker. It just begins to become. So if I have to say during this, that the follicular phase, the uterus will undergo proliferation. That is why it is another name is proliferative phase. Proliferative phase is because the uterus is undergoing proliferation. So the uterus lining will undergo thickening. So this is a minimum thickness is seen here. And slowly, gradually, this is a maximum thickness. Right? Now what happens? This is the follicular phase which occurs in uterus. But now also, as per the textbook, the progesterone hormone, it is quite straight. There is no much drastic increase in the progesterone. Talking about the pituitary hormones. So I will label it as progesterone. Now what happens? So in the pituitary hormones we have two types, FSH and LH. Now when the follicles need to grow and develop, we need one hormone, pituitary hormone, which is called as FSH. Because FSH is having a dominating role here, so that they help in development and growth of the follicles. So here what happens, already FSH will be there little more in the bloodstream compared to LH. LH will not have a role here now, as of now. So therefore I can say that the FSH, I will draw here, FSH will be little more initially. Now what happens? But luteinizing hormone, it is not much seen. So I will say LH will be like flat. Slowly, if you see carefully, the primary follicle which is converted into secondary follicle requires more and more supply of FSH. So this FSH will be acting on the conversion of primary follicles into secondary follicles. Now the secondary follicles will get converted into tertiary follicles. It will become into tertiary follicle. Now this tertiary follicle, the magic game is now. This is theca zona pellucida, theca interna and theca externa. This is tertiary follicle. Now this follicles, okay, maybe it might even get converted into a big and Graafian follicle also. Now the magic game play is done here. Now what will happen? Now the granulosa layer of the Graafian follicle will secrete, or simply if you say also Graafian follicle, not an issue, or tertiary follicle. These follicles during the developmental course will secrete one ovarian hormone which is called as estrogen. So now if you have to see, all this while estrogen was not much evident. Estrogen. It was not much evident. But slowly, as and when the secretion of Graafian tertiary follicle will give, stimulate, they develop, they will release the estrogen. So if you can say here, the estrogen levels will be little rising. Okay, it will be rising. It becomes a little peak-like structure. Now what is going to happen? These estrogens will give a negative feedback to the anterior pituitary. So this estrogen, it will send a negative feedback to the pituitary. I'll do like this. And it will say that please do not supply FSH. No more FSH should be supplied. This is a negative feedback. So this FSH, why estrogen says to the pituitary, anterior pituitary that no FSH should be done? Because we can see so many primary follicles are there. But FSH is control checkpoint here so that it is making sure only one primary follicle is getting matured into Graafian follicle, not many. So that only one gets matured into primary, into secondary, tertiary, Graafian. If the FSH is not having a checkpoint here, what will happen, you know? All these follicles will have equal chances to grow and develop into multi-ovulatory phases, which we do not want and which never occurs in human body. So, only one primary follicle should be successfully getting converted into Graafian follicle, for which estrogen is dominatingly and doing his role. So, estrogen, what it will do? It will stop FSH supply. So, when the FSH supply is less, so what is going to happen now? Suddenly, the FSH line will get declined. It will get declined here. Okay, so FSH will be slowly declining here. But magic is what? Now suddenly FSH will say that no, now Graafian follicle is matured. Graafian follicle has to, now this follicle, see, the thing is, first is controlling other follicles not to develop, it is negative feedback. Suddenly, estrogen will also give a positive feedback. Suddenly, estrogen will say, no, I want FSH as well as LH also now in the picture. Now, why suddenly this negative feedback has changed into positive feedback? Because as the follicles are developing, there is again the requirement of FSH so that proper development of the follicles into Graafian will occur. To make sure that follicles are in a proportionate growth and development, estrogen will suddenly, very unexpected thing just happens here is, estrogen will say anterior pituitary supply FSH but not more, only to the little concentration in the blood. And this little concentration of FSH in the blood is enough to stimulate the Graafian follicle formation. So as the positive feedback comes, again the FSH will raise up like this. It will raise up to make a small peak. But what is the role of LH? The LH will say that I will also grow now, but I told you initially the LH concentration is less. So what is going to happen? Oh sorry, I have used a different color. I wanted to use a blue color. So LH, it will also be there in the blood. Okay, now as soon as the follicles are maturing, it is a time for the Graafian follicle to get ruptured. When rupturing is happening, LH is very, very must and important. So for rupturing of the Graafian follicle, to release the secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle, LH has to be 10 times more than FSH. So if you see in the graph, you will see that the FSH is almost a small peak, whereas LH will be having 10 times highest peak. And this high peak of LH is named as LH surge. It is called as LH surge. What is the importance of LH surge? You know that. LH surge means the LH hormone is more. It is again one of the pituitary hormone. The LH surge, suddenly when it happens, this Graafian follicle will get ruptured and it will throw away its internal secondary oocytes along with corona radiata cells. Along with corona radiata cells. So this phase is again remarked as the ovulation phase, wherein the ovulation occurs, release of the oocyte from the Graafian follicle. As soon as this happens, what is going to happen? Slowly after the ovulation, what is going to happen in the uterus? There is a next phase which is called as your luteal phase. But let's talk about progesterone and estrogen. What will happen to these two people? The progesterone is over. Its task is over now. So no more progesterone is secreted. So therefore the down peak is like this. But whereas the progesterone is again not that much required, so it will be having its own sharp peak. I mean the flat peak. So when the ovulation phase finishes, the Graafian follicle which is ruptured, it gets converted into yellow body which is called as your corpus luteum. So corpus luteum, which is a shrunken part of the Graafian follicle, it is called as a corpus luteum. That is why luteum, luteal phase. So this corpus luteum, when it is formed, what is going to happen? It acts as an endocrine gland temporarily, because corpus luteum will secrete an ovarian hormone which is very important for more thickness of the endometrium. This hormone is called as progesterone. It is called as a progesterone. It is called as a progesterone. Now this progesterone, very important MCQ, is very important for the redevelopment of the endometrial lining of the uterus. If progesterone is there, endometrium will become more thicker. If progesterone is not there, then menstruation cycle will begin. Now let us see how the uterus looks like. The uterus will look like more thick, more swollen, more glandular. So it will look like this. More proliferation has occurred here. So this are all the glandular cells. So this is how the uterus lining will become more and more glandular compared to other previous phases, follicular, proliferative or ovulatory phase. Now, what about the progesterone? As and when you see here, why this thickening is happening? I told you one hormone, progesterone. Progesterone causes the levels become, as see here, corpus luteum is releasing progesterone. Naturally, the progesterone will be raising in the blood level. So suddenly you can see a peak here of the progesterone. If this corpus luteum will be having a time period of 12 days, okay, 10 to 12 days, means 14 plus 12 plus or minus 28 days it will come. Okay, almost 14 plus 12, 28 days, or 26 to 28 days, it just 1 or 2 days varies, but 10 to 12 days is the lifespan of the corpus luteum. Now this corpus luteum thinks that I will be here till 12 days and probably fertilization might be occurring, or it might be successful. So it keeps on waiting up to 12 days, and the progesterone levels will also be actually, it will be high only. But why I have shown the declining graph? Because if the fertilization doesn't occur, if the sperm does not come and fertilizes the egg or the oocyte which is released here, then this corpus luteum is getting converted or will get converted into a white body which is called as the corpus albicans. Corpus albicans. And this corpus albicans is the sign that, okay, there is no fertilization. So progesterone will be moving down. No fertilization, no progesterone. If fertilization has occurred within this time gap before menstruation, onset, next cycle, then this progesterone would have remained, let me draw it, it would have remained high in the blood. Since there is no, so this is like, yes, tick mark, fertilization occurs. If there is no fertilization, the graph will drop down. As in when, so corpus, see, if the fertilization occurs, corpus luteum will be there till the entire gestation period. But If the fertilization does not occur, corpus luteum will get converted into corpus albicans. It is getting converted into corpus albicans. That is a sign and symptom that yes, pregnancy is negative. There is no pregnancy. So progesterone will come down. But some books have even said that the corpus luteum also secretes this estrogen also, but not to very greater amount. So if that is a condition, again the estrogen which has fallen down, the graph peak which has come down, again it will continue to show a smaller peak. So this black peak occurs twice. One is in follicular and second one is by the corpus luteum. So we can see two peaks of estrogen. Whereas progesterone, almost it is stable, low concentration in the blood till ovulatory phase. But as soon as corpus luteum's formation begins, or the Graafian follicle converts into corpus luteum, you will see there is a sudden rise in the progesterone because corpus luteum secretes progesterone. Now what about the FSH and LH? So now here FSH and LH is not having any role because follicle's ovulation has already been completed. So now we can say that the graph is almost again stable. Okay, the graph has almost again become stable or low, whereas see and it is LH will be lower compared to FSH. Okay, so here initially FSH was high and also FSH will be high. Initially LH was low, this was also low. So this is how the entire menstruation cycle occurs. So once again, so this is how the graph will look like. We have 4 phases of menstruation cycle: menstrual cycle, menstrual phase 1, follicular proliferative phase 2, ovulatory phase 3, luteal phase, that is, or secretory phase, that is phase 4. So as per the Ncert, they have clubbed both the phases. That's not an issue, but these are the things which we should remember. So estrogen will be having 2 peaks throughout the cycle, progesterone only once during the luteal phase. If the pregnancy occurs, it will be high in the blood till delivery. If there is no pregnancy, the progesterone will drop down, and again the same cycle will be beginning. So this is how the entire cycle occurs. So initially FSH high concentration, little high because follicle development, again negative feedback, again positive feedback. LH will be having a high peak, 10 times more compared to FSH, which is called as a LH surge. This causes ovulation. So if this chart is 100% clear, we can attempt so many MCQs based on the graphs, based on the different phases. Okay, so this is all about menstruation cycle. Fine, that's all. So see you in the next video with the next topic.